came from a suburb where everything had already been decided by the light. That white Australian light, flattening the roofs and driveways and pale brick walls, flattening even ambition into something sensible, marketable, something that could be entered on a form. In the local shopping center, the mothers with their prams and the girls from school in activewear and lip gloss, and the little coffee kiosks and the pharmacy with its medical cleanliness, all of it seemed to say, not this, not too much feeling, not too much thought, certainly not philosophy, certainly not Europe, certainly not those dead women in novels with their trains and poison and parlors and souls too large for the rooms they were put in. But I had wanted largeness, oldness, greatness, mind. Not the suburban arrangement of life, but the sentence, the library, the worn stair, the old stone court with wind in it. I wanted to be the girl who left. And I did. I went all the way over, almost to the rim of the map, to that little university town by the sea in Scotland, where everything was stone and prestige and draughts under the doors, where the gulls made a mad noise overhead, as if the sky itself were mocking us. St. Andrews. I can say it and still feel the salt. The oldness of it, the narrow streets and the wet cobbles and all those faces, pink from the cold, clever faces, performed faces, boys in wool coats, girls with very straight hair and little leather bags, and beautiful, serious mouths. And everyone seeming to know already how to inhabit youth with elegance. And I, the suburban Australian girl with philosophy in her suitcase and my parents' money in the lining of every day, every single day charged to their love and their faith in me. It should have felt solemn. Instead, it felt at first like enchantment. There was the reading, of course, and the lectures, and the tutorial rooms, and the proper nouns, and the centuries breathing through the walls. But there was also the life I had not anticipated in its fullness, the hedonism of the little town, the illicitness of so much appetite in so small and scholarly a place. Kitchen sticky with vodka and spilled mixer, music muffled through old house walls, girls putting on mascara on mirror shards, lipstick in coat pockets, someone shouting from the stairwell, the cold on bare thighs walking home, the shawarma shop smell after midnight, burgundy wine down my throat. Philosophy by day, ruin by night. Or not ruin, not yet. Pleasure with a black seam running through it. Ecstasy with its own future nausea folded inside. I thought then that this too was learning. This too, to live among brilliant and dissipated people, to speak of ethics while half drunk, to quote Kierkegaard and then throw up in a bathroom with someone holding back your hair and laughing with tenderness or cruelty. Impossible to tell. I thought the contradictions were sophistication. And then the books, the woman, the dead woman, or half dead before they died, which is worse. Emma first, Emma Bovary with a provincial soul all inflamed by language and fantasy and longing. My poor sister, my ridiculous and splendid sister. And Anna after, Anna with the train already singing through the blood before it arrives. Anna whose mind moves like weather over a field, darkening, lifting, rushing back, suspicion, brilliance, disgust, tenderness, self-loathing, hunger, all of it at once, all of it alive and unmanageable. And Effie too, yes, though more pale to me, more distant, yet still touched with that same feminine doom, that being enclosed in a life too narrow for one's inward amplitude. I read them all in seminar, in library, in bed, read for class, yes, to be examined on, to produce the proper observations, realism, adultery, free indirect discourse, social codes, the marriage plot, all those academic little knives with which one dissects a living thing and calls it understanding. But I could not keep them in the abstract. Could not. That was perhaps the first error or the first truth. Others around me managed it. They spoke so neatly. How they spoke. In tutorials, the words came out of them cleanly. Irony, narrative technique, the disciplining function of bourgeois morality, woman under patriarchy, realism's management of desire. And I sat there with my pen and my open notebook and felt almost sick with the falsity of it. not because they were wrong exactly, but because the room itself seemed founded on a lie, on the lie that one could remain external to such books, that one could say Emma Bovary as one says commodity fetishism or social convention, as if she had not entered the bloodstream, but she had entered mine. Anna, too. They no longer stayed where they ought. They walked out of the page and into the weather, into the little shop windows with candles and dresses and cashmere laid out like secular reliquaries of wanting. I would pass a lit window at dusk and think Emma. I would see a woman on the street with her mouth set in that way, that proud, hurt, feminine way, and think Anna. And then worse, I would not think of them but from them, through them, as if my own mind had developed annexes, Russian annexes, French annexes, all wallpapered with ruin. The trouble with reading too intensely when one is young and uprooted and vain, in the way all serious girls are vain, is that one begins to mistake recognition for destiny. I recognize myself in Emma, yes, not in the crude sense of adultery or debt or melodrama, but in the larger shame of it, the shame of wanting the world to answer the scale of one's inner life, and finding instead upholstery, routines, institutions, men. In Anna, too, I recognize something more dangerous, the quickness of thought turning cannibal, the humiliation of consciousness when it grows too large and has nowhere to go. Because I was studying them, being examined on them, I felt my own mind splitting into two incompatible operations. There was a part of me that had to say, in lucid paragraphs, what the text was doing, how the novel functioned, what context shaped its representation of femininity and despair. And then there was the other part, the truer one perhaps, or the matter, which did not want to analyze at all, but only to sink and sink into the atmosphere of these women, to feel their doom as if it were an inheritance transmitted by style. At night in my room, with a radiator clanking, and some girl down the corridor laughing too loudly, and a door slamming and then silence, and then footsteps again and then silence, I would lie awake with phrases moving through my head in loops, not thoughts even, fragments. Emma's boredom, Anna's eyes, Effie in the cold house, my tutorial tomorrow, my mother's face on FaceTime, the sea, the fees, the fees, the fees, my parents paying impossible money for this old prestigious life, for me to sit in those stone rooms and study philosophy, of all noble and practical things, philosophy, while elsewhere the world moves in salaries and spreadsheets and real futures. And what was I doing with that gift, with that sacrifice? I was becoming unwell. I was becoming theatrical in private and blank in public. I was falling behind. The essays, the cursor blinking at me with its tiny, steady accusation. Write, think, prove that you are here, prove it. And I could not. Not because I had nothing to say, but because there was too much static between thought and language. I would read one sentence of philosophy and would burst into 10 directions in my head, references, associations, dread, some memory of a party, Anna at the station, a message from home, everything crowding, no line clear. My room lit only by the desk lamp, coffee gone cold. My hair greasy, my fingers sore from touching my face. Outside the window, the black Scottish dark and my own reflection hovering on the glass, pale and accusatory. I would begin a paragraph and stop after 3 words because they sounded false. Begin again and stop again. Every sentence felt borrowed from some better student, some calm, lucid mind I did not possess. The books I loved most made things worse because they had spoiled for me all language that did not feel alive, and my own seemed dead on arrival. I feared that anyone glancing at me in the dining hall or tutorial room would see the disorder under the skin, the thoughts gone wrong, the terrible inwardness of someone no longer living among things, but inside a feverish relation to them. I would catch sight of myself in a dark window or a market street, double-imaged among the lit shop displays, and feel an almost superstitious disgust. Who is that girl? What has she done with the money, with the chance, with the dream? The old university around me began to seem less sanctuary than theater. Stone and ritual and gowns and bells, and all of it balanced on the assumption that thought could save you, that reading could refine you, that education was still a ladder up out of confusion into form. But what if it was only another arrangement of services? What if I had come all this way, only to discover that the mind was not a citadel, but a room with too many doors? Because I was already half unmoored from the novels, already porous to every text that entered me, the whole world became literary in the worst possible sense. Everything overdetermined, everything symbolic. A woman crossing the street in a fur-trimmed coat, and I thought Anna. A lipstick print on the wine glass, and I thought Emma. The sea itself at dusk, flat and metallic. And I thought of endings. Always endings. The endings of women who desired too much and could not convert their inwardness into livable form. I could no longer tell whether I was reading the town through the novels or the novels through the town. The border blurred, the little stone lanes, the cathedral ruins, the black water, the wind off the North Sea. All of it seemed to conspire into some aesthetic of female collapse that I was vain enough, stupid enough, frightened enough to imagine awaiting me, personally. Eventually I came back to Brisbane, in a state I can only call madness, because no gentler word seems true. Not dramatic madness, not the operatic variety. A worse, quieter kind. Confusion, dread, the sense that my thoughts had ceased to belong properly to me. The suburb received me again, with its sun and its broad roads, and its shopping centers and its blank, practical future, and I moved through it like a displaced soul. Months passed. 6, perhaps, maybe more or less. I stayed at home, and I could not imagine a future that did not feel counterfeit. Friends moved on, days accumulated. I slept too much or not at all. I felt humiliated by my own return, by the collapse of the grand departure story, by the fact of being back in the room where I'd once dreamed myself outward. Everything in Brisbane seemed both too familiar and impossibly far from me. The jacarandas flowered, Christmas came and went. People asked what was next, and I could not bear the question. Yet even in depression, some small bureaucratic ember of life remains. One fills out forms, one opens websites, one considers. And perhaps because I could no longer bear to remain the ruined philosophy girl, the girl who had gone away in pursuit of mind and come back with it in pieces, I began to think of a different self entirely. Commerce. The word itself felt like a slap, a joke, a correction. Commerce, with its hardness, its worldliness, its salaries and timetables and proper uses. A total opposite, a turn away from abstractions towards the machinery of adult life. I looked at Melbourne, not the little medieval town by the sea now, but the city. Trams, towers, movement, anonymity. The possibility of beginning again without the burden of old stone and old dreams. I filled out the application half numb, half feverish, as if completing paperwork for someone I might yet become. When the offer came, I felt not joy exactly, but a loosening. A tiny unfastening somewhere in the chest. Not redemption, nothing so clean, but a line forward. I enrolled. I moved alone. Suitcase again, another room, another city, another self waiting to be tried on. Melbourne this time, with its gridded streets and cold mornings and coffee and crowds and all the young faces moving with purpose. Commerce. The tutorial's not on desire and doom, but on markets, firms, systems, outcomes. Numbers where there had once been novels. Or not instead. Never entirely instead. Because the dead woman came with me. Of course they did. Emma in the tram window, Anna in the dusk crossing Swanson Street across among umbrellas. Effie somewhere in the pale loneliness of furnished rooms. But now they all moved at a little distance, not gone, never gone, only no longer seated at the very center of thought. I do not know if I began anew exactly. Nobody does. One carries the old rooms inside. The North Sea still breaks somewhere inside me. St. Andrews still glimmers there, gray and ruinous and beautiful. The place where I first understood that reading can become too intimate, that a mind can over-identify with its objects and begin to melt around the edges. Brisbane too remains with its bright suburban verdicts, its sensible futures. And Melbourne, then, the third city, the compromise or correction or second act. I think of all the girls I've been, the leaving girl, the enchanted girl, the unraveling girl, the returned girl, the girl who chose commerce after philosophy, as if practicality might cauterize whatever had been open. And perhaps it does not. Perhaps nothing cauterizes. Perhaps one only keeps moving, city to city, discipline to discipline, sentence to sentence, hoping that the self will gather rather than scatter.